Hello, this is Susan Finch, and today I'm with Sales Lead Management Association Radio, the SLMA.com. And today we are talking with Linda Zimmer, who is a communications expert who's traveled the world teaching and coaching and helping people do it better as far as their crisis communication plans, their marketing plans, their strategies on a better way to reach their audience. And she and I have known each other for about 20 years, and I'm so excited to have her here. We're also joined by a friend of mine, David Leopold, who is another social media expert, and I enjoy David and his interviews and some of the questions he comes up with, and I thought the three of us could have a wonderful conversation today and learn some things from Linda about crisis communication plans. So with that, Linda, I want to welcome you.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Well, we're just glad to have you. And David, happy to have you this morning too. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I always look forward to challenges, Susan, and you challenged me, so I said let's go for it. I love challenges.
Oh, thanks. Linda, I'm wondering if you can, give us, a brief background on your experience in this field, and then cover, kind of the basic terminology of crisis communication before we dive into it.
Sure. Probably the first challenge that I had as a young strategist in terms of crisis communication was in the days before the World Wide Web, and that was a pet products company whose dog chews were breaking up and causing choking in dogs. And they had no idea that this crisis was even going on because it was happening then in the invisible world of listservs and email lists. And they only found out about it when pet stores started pulling product off the shelves and sending it back and refusing deliveries. And so this hit them truly coming out of nowhere as far as they were concerned. And so we put together a strategy to engage with the unhappy customers and the vendors in resolving this issue. And so from there, I sort of became this person who knew about these invisible worlds where crises do tend to develop. And in fact, a recent study was done that the epicenter today of where a communication crisis often happens is on Twitter. And so I've sort of run the gamut here from real life to virtual crises. So that's a little bit of the background. And as far as the terminology, I don't know that there's any special terminology except maybe for the word crisis communication in and of itself. Right. A crisis can be anything from a natural disaster, obviously, to some of the really horrendous things that we've seen, like shootings. Things that you have no control over. But it can also be an employee going out there on Facebook and saying something that is perhaps really disastrous to your company. And so crisis really, in my book, is any kind of communication that requires immediate and sustained management. So I guess that's
a good definition, because I think a lot of people only think tragedies that the company CEO gets hit by a car or something, or is caught on the news doing something lewd with somebody. It isn't just that.
Right. It could, and most of the time the crises are completely out of your control. We just look at Target. While it could be argued that it possibly was within their control, it's usually something that blindsides you. It's something that you didn't prepare for. You had, it's one of those black swans that just sort of come out of nowhere and you have not prepared for it.
Right.
Does crisis imply by its very nature that we must be reactive to the situation instead of maybe being proactive to prevent a crisis. Of course, certain things happen that we absolutely have no control over. But it's amazing to me, the very first story that you shared, Linda, was one where a company's product was being challenged and they really didn't know their product was being challenged. I mean, that's crazy that they didn't have whatever follow-up marketing strategies in place that made sure the customers were satisfied with the product. But for a customer to tell you, and it sounds like it was a pretty big crisis, that's just amazing to me.
Yeah, it was a huge crisis, and of course, you know, when it's hitting your bottom line, it's not only your customers that are hurt, but if you happen to be a larger company that has shareholders, this is a big deal. You know, and this happened at a time where we didn't have visible social media like we have today. But I do think that it underscores a really important point about communication channels. And if you are not up to date on the latest type of communication channel and you're still relying on email and fax machines and telephones to figure out what's going on in your marketplace, as a professional, that's bordering on malpractice. Seriously, you really need to at least be aware of the fact that these communication channels are potentially ones that your customers or vendors or suppliers are using. And that doesn't mean you have to be an expert in them, but you need to at least be aware that they exist. And so you cannot just put the blinders on and say, hey, the way we did business has always worked for us, it's going to continue to work, because that's exactly where the crisis will erupt, is the place where you're not looking and you're not monitoring and you're not bringing into at least the landscape of the things that you might have to deal with. And crisis communication, yes, it does imply, I suppose, a reactive. However, I love the term risk management, but that's sort of not what we think about in terms of communications. But that is exactly what you were referring to, is, you know, how do we be proactive and how do we prepare ourselves for a time when we're going to have to really sustain and manage communication.
Well, like it or not, and I'm not a Twitter user at all virtually, but Twitter has changed the world dramatically, because now we have millions upon millions of reporters, if you will, who can create a crisis if they want to, and it's really challenging. And Susan, how do you tell your clients how to prepare for things like this? I mean, what is a good strategy?
For me, for most of my clients, you know, there are like 4 or 5 in particular, my heavier clients, and we do come up with a plan, and it's a statement, it's a hierarchy of contacts, so we know, you know, who to reach in different situations, who to reach after hours, and how, if something came up. And you know, most of the time, I have to, you know, admit, I'm not available in the middle of the night. So for them to understand what their own plan is, to be able to execute it on their own without needing me to do it, I think that's the best thing I can do for them, and one of the best services I can give them is to help them create, this is what we do, this is where we hit it, this is how we get into these accounts. And this, you know, because maybe they aren't the person who usually logs into the Twitter account. They might not be the person who usually logs into the website. So for them to have that list of, if something bad happens, or if you need to quickly distribute a message out there, this is who we hit. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's the, you know, in a small scale, that's what I, you know, do. We can get into more elaborate plans than I have with certain clients, but primarily that's what I target. It's just, you know, I work with usually smaller businesses and organizations, so we can usually knock out a list within an hour or two and a plan. But the other thing I've learned I've had to do, and I learned this when, you know, down south when we had Leisure World for a client, people need annual, like if you have a board that comes in and speaks on your behalf, and every year the board rotates, you need to train the board, and you need to teach them how to be a spokesperson, because they're the ones people are going to find, and they're the ones that, you know, the media will come up to when something strange or bizarre happens, just to get a good soundbite. And you have to be ready. You have to be ready with your no comment. And if they are finding you on Twitter and starting to mention things, or it goes out on, you know, wherever the broadcast is, and this is more with traditional media, with television, radio, newspaper, because that's when those things happen usually. Somebody's out there on the scene wanting to talk to somebody, and they will find anybody. So to teach your clients to be the somebody they find, so the right message gets distributed, is, to me, is also critical.
But that also points to you know, some really tactical things, like, do you have on your website who a contact is? Because, you know, not only just internally appointing that person, but actually externally communicating that. So, you know, you see this on many big brand websites, is you'll go to the newsroom, or you'll have a contact page, and there listed is media inquiries, or you know, emergency contact, or whatever. And if you supply that, those are probably the first places that a person who is interested in getting a comment is going to go. When you don't supply that, and you don't give people the communication channel that you would prefer, you don't even give them the opportunity to follow your protocols. You've basically excluded them. So now, whether they're going to follow it or not is up in the air, but you certainly need to provide that channel.
I was going to ask Linda, excuse me for asking the question, but are you the crisis doctor? Well, and when I say that, obviously people will know to come to you because they have a problem, because of your reputation and being able to handle crisis situations. But once again, I would ask the question, how many folks proactively come to you and say, Linda, we need you to put a crisis management strategy into place in case we have to use it?
I would say a handful of clients have actually approached me when they are in the middle of a crisis, that we need, you know, who is it on television, Scandal, you know, where she comes in and, you know, she's the fixer. But for most of my clients, this is something that we do as part of our initial review as they engage me, is what do we have in place as far as communications during an urgent and real-time unfolding situation. And that's really what a crisis is. It's sort of a real-time unfolding communications management issue. So the idea that you can wait until you're really sick and you need the doctor is really undermining what the effectiveness of your communications could be if you took, as Susan said, a few hours. For a big organization, it could be days, right, to really plan out. And, you know, big brands do this regularly, most of them, where they will scenario play and how do we handle this. And smaller businesses tend not to do that. But it's equally as valuable and almost more important for a small business who might not be able to recover. Case in point, we in the tech industry, you know, the changes to Google have been a really big topic. You know, what's happening to page rank and what's happening to search engine optimization. And these changes in Google hit some companies so hard because they relied on search engine for traffic to their e-commerce sites that they literally went out of business within a few weeks, because their page rank was hit so hard that they were pushed down to oblivion, invisibility. You know, how many of us would really think to think, okay, if our business relies so much on search, how do we plan for a change that we have no control over? Google can change their algorithms overnight, and that can affect our business. what kinds of other communication channels have we opened with our customers so that we can pivot. So for a big organization who's got billions of dollars in the bank, dealing with a crisis is something that is part of doing business. For a small business, it could mean the difference between being in business or not.
Yeah, it's a great. Yeah, you bring up a great point, and I think we need to call in Dr. David Amerlin, who will talk about.
That's what I was exactly when we get.
Because and the hummingbird algorithm change that Google did. It was the first major change that they've made in 13 years. So that was a big one, and some folks were kind of prepared for it. Most of the world was not prepared for it. But to your point, Linda, Google can make a quick change very, very quickly, and folks not know about it, and then have to react to that situation. Semantic search, and I was kind of, David Amerlin is the champion of semantic search, and if you read he talks about it, and I'm going to ask him this question next time I have an opportunity to chat with him, because he does talk to international companies. I mean, he has a lot of international companies that are his clients. I would like to know how he helps them or talks about it, and how the word crisis enters into the discussion. Because you're right, Linda, a crisis with a large company can be absorbed somehow. Hopefully, with a small business, they can be out of business in 24 hours.
But this comes down to the same thing about tactical, research and preparation. Linda, you hit on it. If somebody is relying so heavily on search engine optimization or that type of, situation for their business to grow and stay alive, you have to take that responsibility, because I've seen companies and it's like, oh, it's changed and now business is bad. Well, that's not good enough. If that's your business, you better be in the groups with your finger on the pulse of every bit of this research and the changes coming, and asking questions and being ready, because you can't just put your head in the sand and say, oh, how sad, look what happened to me. You had a choice. You need to stay informed and know that that's part of your plan. If that's where your future lies, then that has to be part of your plan, to stay on top of that, wherever your future is.
Absolutely. And I just a week or so ago, I gave a presentation to a large group of small business people, and it's interesting that the attitude about online media, social media is it's very secondary in terms of their business strategies. It's a lot of people dismiss it. It's a time, it really takes a big commitment in time, and there's not enough time. And I really stress that this is exactly the same way that you do business in the real world, and that is you build a trust network. Susan, you started this off by introducing us and what our relationship was to each other, right? Because we've built a trust among us, and that is how most people do businesses. If you're a big brand, that's a little tougher to do, but a small business, more and more I hear, oh, I do business on referral, I do business via search engine, I do business because people know that I am an expert in XYZ. And if one of your mechanisms for building that trust is compromised, you ought to have a distributed network that you can pivot and shift. And so when we think about social media, we can't think about it as a channel in which to get followers. What we have to think of it is an insurance program for our trusted networks. And that's possibly our customers, our vendors, our suppliers, whoever the stakeholders are in our business, so that we have multiple ways to get in touch with them. So we've got email, we've got fax, we've got telephone, and there's you know, all of these other channels where our customers and other stakeholders might be. And so it's really important to be looking across the landscape and creating what I call a distributed network, so that you can gather people in the event that something like a crisis happens, and you can still continue to communicate with them. I mean, it's sort of disaster recovery 101, right?
No, definitely. And that is about, you know, just sticking it all in one place. When that shifts, what's your plan B?
Right. You know, and let me kind of go back to, we focused a little bit on some of the overriding tactical things, but I think the first step in preparing for crisis communication is really knowing who you are. And by that I mean, you know, are we the happiness company? Coca-Cola is known, you know, the happiness company. We deliver happiness. It has nothing to do with the beverage and everything to do with our experience and what we're doing. If you are a company that, like the Susan, your Binky Patrol is all about kids and comfort for kids. If you really know at your core who you are, that is the first step, because in a crisis, you mentioned the board members and executives and everything else. In a crisis, if we all have a really clear definition of who we are as a company, our communication falls in line, and we know who our natural alliances are as well if we need them. So if we're all about kids, we might look across the landscape and say, oh, these organizations are also about kids. We might want to connect with them just so we can start building a relationship with them, because in the event something happens to us, they become our natural alliances. And most companies, most individuals, it's really interesting. If you ask them to declare in 6 words or 7 words or less who they are, they struggle with it. They cannot do it. And I saw this with a huge tech brand who the CEO was being interviewed on one of the business shows, and asked, you know, okay, you're this great big company and you've got all of this, all of these divisions. Who are you in 5 words or less? And the CEO could not do it. Could not say it, and that was unfortunate because it was on live radio. But the point is if you know at your core what you are at your core, regardless of what your messages around the crisis is, you can be pulling together messages that go right to that core, whether it's kids or happiness or health or whatever it is. So even in that crisis, you can keep to your core as you're dealing with it.
I think that's, so, you know, how do you bring that out? I mean, that's another service to give, you know, a client, and it's one of those basic introductory things as you get to know each other. Nail that. They have to know it, because if they aren't confident in those, you know, 5 to 7 words, they will always fumble, because they will never be able to go back to home, you know, when they need to settle in and, you know, step back, get back to where we belong, and speak from that place if they don't know where that place is.
Exactly. So, you know, no matter what, if, you know, let's just say we're all about, you know, happiness, you can always give yourself that 5 seconds or 30 seconds or 10 seconds to think, while you're saying, as you know, our company represents happiness, and that allows you to bridge to whatever your comment is. But if you haven't internalized that as a board, as executives, as the person who answers the phone, then it does become a situation where your communication becomes fragmented, and you are not delivering the right messages around whatever it is that you're trying to manage at that point.
I'm gonna stop right here for just a second. We're gonna take a quick break for our radio hour because we always have to take a little break in the middle, and then we will come right back. So it's mainly just everybody take a deep breath, and there we go.
They require customized lead management systems and services and integration with additional systems. That's why, since 1981, these companies have relied on Smart Lead by AdTrack, the only full-service lead management company with customized systems for lead management, Salesforce automation, and analytics. These systems are managed by each client's dedicated account manager and are integrated with Smart Lead's in-house marketing services that include a contact center, email marketing services, print services, direct mail and fulfillment, and an ISO-certified warehouse. Smart Lead by AdTrack. 3 decades of pioneering lead management best practices and systems for complex lead management needs. For more information, visit our website at smartlead.com.
If you'd like to learn more about either sales lead generation or sales lead management, why not check out the only organization that focuses on both, the SLMA website. You can go to simply theslma.com. That's THESLMA.com. Sign up for your free membership and learn more.
Back with Linda Zimmer on SLMA Radio, and during this HOA as well, we are talking about crisis communication plans and what you need to have in place as a small business, a large business, but primarily small businesses, because as Linda covered in the first half hour, one crisis can take you down. Don't let that happen. Be ready. And part of what we were ending with in the last half hour was identifying who we are. Who are you as a business? What is your core message in 5 to 7 words? Can you do it? Do you know it? And if you don't, you need to figure it out. So with that, back to you, Linda.
Thanks. I also think there's a really philosophical question as you're preparing, as you're sort of in your mode of, okay, if something happens, we now know our messaging. The next thing is to ask, what's our philosophy about communication? And that sounds sort of like a meta question. But if you don't know the philosophy, and by that I mean, is it fight? Is it flight? Is it engage? Is it obfuscate? Is it turn it over to our attorneys? If you can't answer kind of what that philosophical basis is, that's a problem, because first of all, if you have a philosophy of, hey, if something goes wrong in this company, we're going to face it and engage with it, apologize for it or whatever, then the next question is, does that philosophy match your legal counsel's philosophy on communications? Because what I have seen happen in really, really big brands is the company has the philosophy, we're going to engage, we're going to face it. The lawyers then in a crisis are the first ones that are called in, and they have a completely different philosophy about how to handle communication. And any smart executive is going to defer to their legal counsel when something like this happens. But if those two philosophies are at odds, that's going to damage your brand probably more than the crisis itself, because people have come to expect that you're going to face and engage, you're going to stand your ground and fight or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you go silent because that's exactly what your lawyers have told you to do at that point, is to just shut it all down. That is a miscommunication of your brand. So that it seems like a stupid question to ask, perhaps, but it really gets to the heart of when you're in a crisis mode, how are you going to respond?
I've seen that happen in companies, and where the two don't agree. And what happens is when the key contact people listen to the opposing method of handling it, the rest of the group that was so used to handling things a certain way, of being upfront and being open, they feel betrayed. Yep. And that the trust is beaten down almost instantaneously, because they not only feel betrayed, but they feel lost. It's like, I won't do it right now. Now I'm going to do it wrong because they were doing it wrong. And the confidence, everything is just destroyed.
Yeah.
isn't everything going to, though, ultimately end up with how your attorneys say that it should be handled? I mean, isn't that going to be the ultimate resolution? And to your point, maybe all crisis management should come out of legal departments. Totally out of legal departments, not a marketing department, but the legal department who has a marketing person in their department, because they're gonna have to be the ones to either defend or prosecute. You know, they're gonna have to do one of those two things, and so maybe that's the great place to start.
Well, it is, and in fact, and that's why I raised the question is, you know, you can sit around your conference room and say, let's do a scenario about a shooting at the theater, and do all the crisis planning, you know, among all the people inside your company. But if you don't include your legal counsel in the scenario making, it's a huge gap, because what you're inviting then is this scenario that we're talking about is you guys are really well prepared, and your legal counsel comes in and says, nope, that's not how we would handle it in that situation. So well, I wouldn't say that your legal department is the best person or place to put the lead. They definitely are the ones that should be part of your scenario planning. So they need to have a voice at the table. They will guide the situation. They will be at the lead, guiding you internally during the crisis, which is why it's so important for them to be part of this discussion of, if we're a company that believes in engaging, and that's what we've done all along, now that a crisis hits, legal counsel, how do we navigate our engagement philosophy with this situation? And you need to bring your legal counsel in to have those discussions, you know, about something as simple as, you know, an employee goes onto Facebook and talks about, and I've actually seen this happen, where they're live tweeting a massive layoff at a company. And believe it or not, the marketing and PR department, Susan, to your point, didn't have passwords. And so, you know, legal counsel sitting next to you on workforce issues ought to be part of that scenario planning.
Yeah, I mean, David and I talked about that, and I'm small. I mean, I'm a solo that brings in team members. So, you know, I can bring in a lot of great experts on things, but because I'm a solo and I value my clients so much, you know, I don't have legal counsel at my fingertips all the time. You know, usually it is only when I truly need it, just because it's not in that budget. So, you know, what I've come up with, though, is a true plan that, you know, this is who handles which pieces of it, everything. These are the 3 people that have the access to all the passwords. This is the 1 person who has the access to all the financial things. You know, if something happens, and then they all know each other. And I've put them all actually into a circle on Google Plus, that the person who has, you know, my access to my accounts, she can get in and post something, and can, you know, immediately get a hold of all these people. And she has a, you know, something in Drive that she can reach the people for the different pieces. Say, okay, this is what we have.
Yeah.
What are we going to do, and how do we help the clients that we're relying on her? How do we help the family? Whatever the piece is that needs help. And, you know, it's kind of like when people do estate planning and other things, and I never want to talk about when I die, it's so depressing. Put on your big girl pants, you know, do this. I mean, that's what you have to do this. And what it does too is, when you have these things in place and you revisit them every few months, because you should, you review quarterly to make sure, is that still who I want to have in charge of this? Are those still current passwords? And at that point, when you review it, it gives you peace of mind. And
it definitely does give you peace of mind. And you know, in a crisis situation, you're not thinking very straight.
No.
But when you've thought this through ahead of time, you kind of go into that automatic mode. It's like, okay, I know how to do this, sort of that, proverbial, I know how to ride a bike, I don't have to think about it. And when you're in a crisis situation, trust me, you have a lot to handle, and things come at you that even the best laid plans for a crisis are going to throw things at you that you were not prepared for.
Agreed. Getting on a more personal note, talking about, crisis communications even in families.
Mm-hmm.
The importance of having that type of thing in place. A friend of mine, her brother-in-law passed away quite suddenly a few days ago. And, and I've been through enough deaths in the family and things, but with the part that we don't count on when we're having to handle the estate, handle the person, handle the arrangements, fly people in, whatever it is, what you get hit with that you don't count on is the people that are so upset by it that you're having to stop your, whatever it is, emotional ties and your task to care for these people that might even be just distant contacts out of respect.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a lot different in this situation. You don't understand always the ripple effect of a crisis in a business.
No, and of course you're always dealing with people, right? Which are the most unpredictable thing on the planet. So, you will always run into things that you cannot anticipate, and it's really important that as a team you understand that people are being hit with things that they did not anticipate. What I've often seen happen as well is when a crisis hits, the team disintegrates because fingers get pointed, and that can. It's really important to understand that everybody's getting hit with things that we didn't anticipate. And as you said, you put your big person's pants on and say, okay, we can't be pointing fingers at anybody on the team. We've all got to come together and do the best that we can do. But hopefully you've got a really good cohesive team that you've built some trust in on that.
It's that credit and blame that seems to seep in during those situations, and a lot of situations, and I think it's detrimental to most communication plans, marketing teams, any team. It's that need to give credit and give blame, and until you can get out of that, you're not solving anything.
Right, and I guess I've sort of gone through a couple of philosophical questions here. One is, do you know who you are? The second one being, do you know what your philosophy is about communication? And I would say sort of that third and final meta question, before you get to scenario planning is, do you know the difference between being right and being effective? And
great question.
Those are two very different things, because often in a crisis, you want to get the message out. It's not our fault. We did everything right. Your attorneys are looking at sort of that defensive mode, perhaps. And if you understand the difference between being effective and being right, you might be able to take a different path. So to your point is, if we're going to avoid finger pointing, it's because we need to be effective right now. And what's the most important thing is being effective, and not necessarily pushing out the message that we were right, we were right, we were right. It's about maintaining trust. It's about maintaining customers, maintaining revenue, maintaining your reputation. And how do we best do that in a crisis, as opposed to beating through the message of we were right all along? And that's not necessarily the most effective way to get to your end point, which is coming out of this as unscathed as possible.
That's a great point. You've given some really, these are key facts, key points, all your meta points on, I'm just rereading them. What's our philosophy about communication? Who are we, and then the difference between being right and being effective. We know big companies usually have this in place. Do you see that most do, or do large companies not have these pieces in place?
Most large brands do have this in place. They do scenario planning. They do crisis communication planning. You know, in a lot of cases, they actually have a crisis communication team that they've built, and they go through this, and you know, that's certainly true of a couple of really large brands that have gone through some problems recently and that have been out in the news. Is they had scenario plans for lots of things. You know, and primarily focusing on things like, well, what happens when, you know, something bad happens at one of our locations, and they've got that scenario planned down. But when something like a data breach happens that had nothing to do, you know, nothing really to do with their own actions, but perhaps you know, was something that was completely unanticipated. You know, again, that's going to hit you from someplace out in left field, but that doesn't mean your processes aren't pretty much the same. And if you've got these philosophical questions answered up front, it becomes a lot easier to put the protocols in place, because you've already got these fundamental answers to the questions. Okay, we know that our philosophy is engagement. So how are we going to navigate engagement in this particular situation, as opposed to sitting there and arguing about, do we fight or do we fly? You know, you're not having that discussion. What you're having is engagement is where we stand, and how do we navigate that philosophy within this particular situation.
So for businesses, let's say 50 and under, you know,
Mm-hmm.
smaller businesses that probably don't do all the role play and get all this, you know,
Right.
have it in place. Let's give them, without giving away your professional services, but can we give them a few startup tips? These 3 questions are huge, and that's a great starting point. But from there, after they've answered that, can you give a few tips on, you know, what should be next in their plan as far as creating this type of, you know, solution, or, you know, the thing that will catch them before they fall?
Right. I would say the first thing is to bring your salespeople in and ask them, what are the things that could really derail us? Because it's the salespeople or the customer service people that tend to be on the front lines, and they're the ones that hear the whispers, that know the competitive landscape really, really well. And so if you've got someone in charge of business development or sales, that's the first person to come in and ask the question, what can derail our success? What is the worst thing that could happen to us? And that kind of gives you an idea of where some of those hot spots might be. So I would say that's one of the first things to do. Another thing to do is to realize people are going to be looking for information. And if you've got a small company, chances are you're either an online business because you can scale and keep your numbers low, or you're a fairly small company. You still need to do scenario planning, but what you need to do is recognize that the very first and important channel is your website. And what you might want to do is create a page that is specifically for a crisis situation. Keep it dark. It doesn't have to be published. But if you already have it set up with things like who are the contacts, you know, recognizing we need a summary of the situation, that is really helpful, because when a crisis happens, that can be your first place to publish something. What you're doing is establishing your website as the hub of the latest and greatest information, the truth about what is happening.
And sometimes, though, when businesses are relying on their website, let's talk about the GoDaddy debacle and the Bluehost one recently.
Mm-hmm.
What's our next channel where they would go? You need to have that plan B. It can't just be the website. That's where Twitter and some of the others come into place. Where else can you quickly say, hey, we know it's down. We're so sorry for the inconvenience. We are working on it. You know, direct message us or whatever you need to.
Right.
I was going to say the format that we're using right now, a Hangout on Air, can be the greatest tool that somebody could use in a crisis situation. If I were a CEO of a company and there was some kind of crisis that came in, I would immediately go to Google Hangout on Air, do a Hangout, and then take that and embed it on my website. Take that Hangout and embed it right on the way. And it's so easy to do. It could be done in 15 minutes if you've planned for it, if you have it in place. But what better way to deal with a crisis situation like that than that immediacy? And I don't know. I guess you look at network television differently than you look at the internet. I mean, the internet is right now. Network television might be 5 minutes from now, or 10 minutes from now, or a half hour from now. But we've got the tools at our fingertips to handle it right now.
Oh, that is a great point, to totally direct your message on what you want to say, depending on what the situation is. But to have a YouTube live event, hanging out waiting for you to pull the trigger on it when you need it, or hang out, whichever one you want to use, it gets you to the same end. It's live broadcast, your people, your message, from wherever they are, they could handle it. They could do it from their phone if they had to.
Right. But I think one of the pitfalls is, especially for those of us who are so dependent on online media, is we can't forget not everybody is digitally connected, or that part of our crisis is the internet's down.
Right.
Or our website is down, as you said. So recognizing that old-fashioned channels have a really important function here, and that is, have you thought about a recorded message or a special phone number that you provide, and a recorded message on that phone that gets updated? Do you give people the ability to put in their mobile phone number so that you can text them with updates if that's necessary? Do you have an email list? And if you do, are you utilizing your email list, if you have connectivity, to keep people updated or to allow them to opt in? Most crises happen over a span of days or weeks. The media are the ones that would love to be updated, of course, in real time. But don't forget that your customers are going to be saying, wow, especially if you're a supplier of some commodity that they need. Are you keeping them up to date on what the status is if there's a strike at the port and you can't get product off a ship? Are you keeping people updated on what's happening with that strike or with that disaster there? So don't overlook the plain old telephone line, and the ability to connect with people via a mobile device that they have as well.
Well, I know, I've been in situations. I was with Binky Patrol one time against a large company that found us, wanted to sue us for our name.
Really?
Yes, because they said, we own that word when it has to do with babies. I said, really? You're going to sue me with what I do? I said, hold on. And to still remember the channels of who are your contacts at your local paper, your local radio stations, your local television stations, that still does matter. Because that is still, we can think everybody's going online to find everything. They aren't. The bulk of the population still turns on that news to CNN, still turns on their local channel to see exactly what's going on. They don't do it through their browsers. We'd like to think they do, but they don't. Who would you call? And so I made a call to the Times, to the Register, and within minutes, not only did they back down from their suit, but the company president contacted me and gave us special permission to use that word for as long as we want. And because it was ugly, and they were going, and both reporters called back later. They said, "You call us anytime if they ever say another thing to you." They were like big brothers, we'll beat them up for you, and they were going to, So that is important, and again, continuing with those relationships.
Yeah, and if you're using local media is a huge boon, and it's so easy to connect with reporters today because 98% of them use Twitter. And so you can easily connect with them in the channels and learn who they are and what beats they cover just by doing a little research on Twitter. And once you know that, then it's fairly easy to go and find what their email address is or their telephone number is at that publication. And so it is a huge benefit to you to know who your local media contacts are and to open up a channel with them. Hopefully you know who they are before something like this happens.
Right.
And for most businesses of any size, they're doing some kind of public relations, and so they should know who their local and or relevant journalists are in their industry.
They should have a list. I mean, it's a list that has to be maintained and updated quarterly at the minimum. You have to know if that person's still there and if they're still current. But put them in your circles on Google+, put them in your lists on Twitter, put them in your groups, on Facebook, whatever you need to keep it all centralized and give your key people access to that. So if you're not able to get online, but they can on the East Coast, let them get in there. Have somebody in different time zones is also a big thing to me.
Yes.
You have contacts in additional time zones that aren't on your same systems that can get out and get to your information and get it to the right people.
Exactly. And and that brings up another important point that I wanted to communicate today, and that is you need to be sure that whether you use social media channels or not, that you have reserved your profile names. Because what happens, I mean, we can look at the BP spill. Somebody went on and created a spoof account during the height of the crisis, immediately after the crisis, and of course they were blasting out what appeared to be official messages on an account called BP, and this can happen to you regardless of whether you use Twitter as a channel. But if you have a handle on Twitter, a Facebook page under your name as an official, and it's blatantly official, it's something you can turn on at a moment's notice and start using to prevent someone from co-opting this situation to destroy your reputation or to be putting out misinformation. So whether you use social media or not, make sure that you go in and create a Google Plus profile, a Twitter handle under your company name, a Facebook page, a Pinterest account, whatever it is.
Grab them all.
Grab them all. And then this is usually part of my discussion about internal policies, but I always encourage my clients to have a policy where, because this happens especially in small businesses, an intern comes in and creates your Facebook page for you, or you hire somebody as a contractor who sets all of your pages up, but you do not have the login information. And so when we do social media policies, one of the things that I always put in there as a provision is, if you create a page, you must have a central repository for the password. Now, in some situations, that's a bad idea. Like Facebook, for example, you have to use your personal profile to log in. But the workaround there is someone's else in the company needs to be administrators on that account so that you can post to it. So reserve your names in every platform that you might find useful, that your customers might be using, or your other stakeholders or the media. And then if you need to, keep them dark, but keep a repository of all of those logins, passwords, who the administrators are, as you've mentioned before, Susan. So get those channels locked down, even if you never ever use them, because I've seen it happen too often where somebody wants to co-opt the conversation. And another point is you should also create specific hashtags that you know you're going to use. Hashtags will get created around you, and you need to be aware of those. Hashtags are now used on many platforms. So use those keywords, but have them pre-established so that you can communicate those as well. We'll be using the hashtag XYZ so that people know that and can follow that.
Good point. David, do you have any thoughts on this?
You guys made me think about things that I haven't thought about for a long time. I remember, Linda, when you were talking, and you don't forget the traditional way of doing business back in the early 90s. I totally forgot about this till I was listening to you talk, that one of my clients back in the 90s was the American Red Cross, and who faces more crisis situations than the American Red Cross. And the moment there was a crisis situation, and I was working with a teleservices company, an individual in that company was contacted 24/7, and then automatically a phone bank of hundreds of people were available to take phone calls in that crisis situation. Now, it's a crisis of a different sort, and it's handled differently, but don't forget. Oh, I'm totally confused now. should we use the old way of doing it? Yes. The new way of doing business today, has it complicated the situation? Probably has complicated it. There's more immediacy. Things happen right now, but to your point, capture your identity on what, 200, 400, 1,000 social platforms that are out there?
Well, I think you can probably stick with the most popular ones, or the ones that your industry, if you're business to business, LinkedIn might be the most important place for you to be, or an industry forum. I deal a lot with privacy issues, and belong to some government steering committees on that. IT people who are concerned about privacy live in a different world than Twitter. And so there might be industry forums that are really important for you to be on. So not 1,000 platforms, but I would say for public-facing companies, a good dozen for, of the most popular ones. And then for B2B companies, they need to really be aware of where their markets are hanging out and discussing industry topics. And then, grab identities on those particular forums.
And be aware of false identities that are out there posing, or that could be confused with you and what they are doing. Because to not do that little bit of research is a very ignorant way to be. I've watched clients get blindsided by somebody that had a slight variation on their name, and they didn't even know they were out there until bad things started to happen. So be aware of what else is out there that might not be you, that people could think is you.
Right, and there's a very simple thing that you can do to see if a crisis is erupting that you may not otherwise know, and that is simply to use some of these massive tools that are available, many of them for free, to put up alerts for your brand name.
Right.
And check on, just make a habit of checking on that every day to see how is your brand being mentioned in everything from Google News to Twitter and Facebook and every place else, so that you can aggregate any mentions of your brand. You can do nothing with it except watch for an erupting issue that might be coming. Even if you choose not to engage in those channels, it can be a very great listening mechanism.
Your point that you made a few moments ago about using hashtags, outstanding point to share. I actually did an interview with a gentleman who lives in Japan, and he has developed a whole hashtag tracking kind of system. And just by you mentioning that, I'm going to go to him and say, here's a new way to really think about how to use your hashtags. He should have an emergency hashtag section that people can go to see how, because you're right, somebody can capture your hashtag, can capture your crisis pretty easily today. it's not a difficult task to do it. And the other point I wanted to make, I think Twitter, one of the most brilliant business decisions of all time, in my mind, was when Twitter said you can have 140 characters to tweet, because it makes our thinking very concise. We have to think in the most basic terms that we possibly can to get the message out there. But it was a brilliant business decision, and also saved them billions of dollars in server space for tweets.
Exactly.
We're getting towards the end of our hour. I can't believe it has flown by. But I wanted to, thank David for joining us today. And Linda, I want people to be able to find you. Where can they find you, if they're thinking of engaging in somebody with your experience and your level of expertise in this?
On my website, of course, which is MarcomInteractive.com, but I'm a huge Google Plus user, so if you just search Linda Zimmer on Google Plus, you will find me there, and feel free to message me there. And love to have new followers, but I do engage daily on that channel. Those are probably the two best places. I do have a Twitter handle. I'm a huge listener on Twitter, but I don't put out a lot, so Google Plus is the place to get me.
Terrific. Well, this has been the SLMA Radio Hour. Oh, and David, where can people find you, Small Biz Dave?
Cincinnati, Ohio. No, actually, Small Biz David, if you Google it, you will find me. Dreaming with Entrepreneurs, that brand is out there pretty strongly. Actually, Google made me change the way I think a little bit. It's also David F. Leopold is out there. So that's the best way to do it.
All right. Well, you can
ask Susan Finch, because she knows how to get in touch with me.
I can on a moment's notice. So this has been the SLMA Radio Hour on slmaradio.com. We are soon to be expanding to SLMA Live, where we will have multiple channels and stations coming into our one big broadcasting station to have more broadcasting for businesses, large and small, 24 hours a day. So you can find us out there. And thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.